So now we're moving into the rebuttal period. Each debater will now have 10 minutes to provide a rebuttal. I'll announce to each debater when 2 minutes are remaining, and I'll give an additional notice when 30 seconds are remaining. So, Dr. Sarkar, you have the first rebuttal. You have 10 minutes.
I want to thank Paul for coming and explaining some very interesting biology to us, and also sharing with us his complete surprise about both how complex the biological world is and how difficult he finds it to explain much of it. I think that's a useful task to do. But let us look at what he wants us to infer from that. The inference is supposed to go, if I gather from his remarks, in the following sort. So we right now do not know how to explain everything that happens in some of the simpler cells. And one of the simplest cells we know turns out to be somewhat more complicated than we thought in terms of the minimal number of genes that must be functional for the cell to be alive. Since we do not know anything about this that can be explained by standard evolutionary theory, we should therefore infer that there is some intelligent designer up there that is responsible for the creation of the cell. And it's the last part of this inference that I want to challenge. So let's go back to this. When should we be willing to doubt that something can be given a purely natural explanation? That's what's at stake in the example that Paul introduced and the argument he presented. Well, first, we need to have an absolutely clear understanding of what extranatural explanations consist of, what they allow, and what they don't permit. What the intelligent design creationists have never specified is what exactly their theory is. In particular, they don't tell us anything about what properties the designer is supposed to have. For example, which mutations does the designer cause and why? What are the constraints on the designer? We know that evolution is constrained. What are the constraints on the designer and all of that? And that is exactly what we need to know to infer that somehow saying that there is a designer out there or a sign of intelligent design is a rational conclusion to draw every time we see that there's something or the other in biology that we cannot explain right now. Now, what's the best analogy we can offer? What he offers you is the case of the photograph, other cases like Stonehenge. There are tons of cases like that, archaeological cases, where initially we were not aware of what exactly the function of the thing was or what exactly happened. We decided in our minds to test the possibility that there was a human intelligent designer that was involved, and on the basis of that, try to make inferences as to what is likely to have happened. But the crucial point here is we know enough about human designers, what they can do, what their purposes might be, what kind of minds they may have, that we can talk of the likelihood of one design versus another, the likelihood of one feature versus another. If we know absolutely nothing about what the designer is, surely it's idiotic to go around and claim that the goals, functions, intentions, all these things of the designer are similar to that of human designers. And because of that, we can, by analogy to a human design, ever attribute or estimate correct likelihoods of certain things to occur. And that's precisely what we are not given, because we are not given any of the properties of the designer. So the first thing I want to suggest that before we even begin to consider this hypothesis of intelligent design, that we get enough detail on who the designer is and what the design is, so that we have some standard explanations of phenomena from the hypothesis of intelligent design that are uncontroversially good explanations. Second, what we would want to do is that on the hypothesis of intelligent design, we must be able to explain everything that standard evolutionary theory now explains, and more than that. And when I say standard evolutionary theory now explains, I provided a list up there. You have to explain the DNDS ratio, you want to explain Halding's rule, windows of reduced variation around selected genes, origin of gene families, all the biogeographical patterns, the mitotic drive genes, P elements, all of these things have to be explained from the point of view of extranatural design. And on top of that, the onus is on them to make novel predictions that are predictions that are peculiar to the hypothesis of intelligent design and would not be made under the hypothesis of evolution by natural selection, and that these predictions happen to be exact enough that we can test them in the laboratory. After all, the attempt over here is to present intelligent design as a scientific theory that is supposed to be on par with evolutionary theory, and therefore subject to the same standards of scrutiny as evolutionary theory is. So when Paul comes up for his rebuttal, beyond going on with the story, what I would really like you to do is to put some flesh on what this theory of design is supposed to be. What does the designer do? What is the designer? What properties does the designer have? Just as in evolutionary biology, we can tell you what properties natural selection has. We can tell you exactly how mutations can occur. We can talk about the blindness of mutations. We can tell you statistical distributions we expect if mutations were not blind. We want that kind of information and that kind of detail from the point of view of the design theorists before we can evaluate them. And once that happens to be evaluated, should it be the case that it survives the scrutiny of that kind of experimentation, then we can actually seriously begin to judge or advocate the merits of the two theories, whether evolution actually is something that is seriously under challenge from anything else. And I'll stop there.